When I was younger, I used to say to my mum and dad, can I go out and play in the dengar, please? They looked at me and said, you mean garden? I said, yeah. Only now recently have I thought, well, I wonder if I am dyslexic. I haven't had it diagnosed, but when I read books, I sometimes read the sentences back to front, and then I have to read that line again to make sure I've understood. It probably would help my confidence. I mean, I can talk to people, Dotun, but then I sometimes shut up if we're in a group and that. I'm sort of scared to say the next sentence because of my confidence.
Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Working to Work. Episode 7 is actually excerpts from a phone-in that I was a guest on the BBC, Radio 5 Live. I had spoken to the producer, one of the producers on 5 Live, about speaking about the Working to Work project and what I'm looking to do with it. And they suggested that I be a guest on the show and that we have a phone-in through that show about neurodiversity in general, as opposed to specifically in relation to employment. And yeah, I was thrilled to be asked about that, to do that, because what I'm really fascinated in is hearing other people's experiences and what synergies there are and what has worked and what hasn't, and hearing about the courage people have accessed to make challenging situations work for them. So yeah, hope you enjoy this, and I'll check in at the end.
The voice of the UK. This is 5 Live.
Dotun Adebayo. Listen live on digital, online, smart speaker, or the BBC Sounds app.
Yeah, good morning. This is the Nightclub on BBC Radio 5 Live. It's a special programme tonight, very special programme, planned towards the end of last year, when I was in conversation with my guest tonight, and he told me that he was the host of the Working to Work podcast, and I naturally asked, well, what's that? And he told me a little bit more. He's here with me this evening. Sam Robinson, welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Dotun. Thank you for having me.
We've got a very special programme tonight, and it's a programme discussing neurodiversity. Hold on. You might want to explain what we mean, Sam, by neurodiversity. A lot of people will know, but clarify.
When I think about neurodiversity, what I take from it is an umbrella term that kind of catches autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, different ways that like people communicate and they cognitively talk and behave that maybe differ from how the vast majority, even though we all have differences in terms of how we do those different facets. So neurodiversity is kind of recognizing that there is a spectrum of human experience in terms of how we operate. And I think some of those conditions have been seen as flaws rather than kind of like addressing them as differences like we do with a lot of other aspects of kind of diversity in society. So the idea of neurodiversity is celebrating that and seeing these kind of conditions that people are diagnosed with and have challenges with, but also strengths as things that we should try and accommodate and appreciate more.
I think that was an excellent description of what we're talking about today. And you know, on the Nightclub, we are not shy of talking about issues that perhaps in other places we wouldn't talk about. We wouldn't spend an entire programme maybe talking about neurodiversity. But from what Sam said there, one of the definitions of, or one of the conditions, if you like, if that's the right phrase, and correct me when I get the wrong phrase, by the way, Sam, we might be here all night in that respect, but one of the aspects of neurodiversity you mentioned is dyspraxia, and then I immediately thought, oh, well, we've got neurodiversity in my family, so I'm assuming that there won't be many families, many people who don't have examples of neurodiversity within their families. And as you said, very crucially, it was previously seen as a flaw. In fact, going back to my generation, those of you who are old enough to have grown up, maybe, gone to school in the 60s and 70s, or even earlier than that, and maybe even up to the 80s and 90s, will remember there being people who weren't described as and this is even before people were described as autistic, actually. There were a plethora of unflattering ways of describing somebody who, as you were saying, Sam, perhaps their cognitive perspective is different from what we would expect from the majority, yeah? Because there are two terms. One is neurodiverse, but then the other, which encapsulates everybody else, apparently, is what?
Neurotypical.
Neurotypical. Isn't that quite something? Okay, I'm not sure if I'm neurotypical, and this conversation might be a surprise to a lot of people, because we've had a journey, you and I, all of us listening to this program, we've had a journey, haven't we, in life where we've been described in different ways, and things affect us. The impact of description per se is quite startling. I do want to hear from you. If you've been diagnosed as neurodivergent, then talk to me. I want to hear what it means to you, how it's affected your life, neurodiversity. And I find it fascinating, amongst other things, because it has so many qualifications in society, Sam. When we talk about the workplace, many people listening perhaps haven't really considered how neurotypical the workplace is, and how it is somewhat hostile to neurodiversity.
Yeah, 100%. And just to pick up on something else you mentioned about how people were perceived, still today, autism spectrum disorder, it's got disorder in the name, ADHD, it's got deficit in there. So having been through some of these assessments myself for autism, for ADHD, they're looking at your deficits, or what they perceive as deficits, as opposed to strengths. So I think, and ideally in the future, we see a shift in that way of identifying where needs can be better met. But in terms of work, I think I'm really fascinated to speak with people and hear from people that maybe don't have a formal diagnosis, but who can resonate with some of the challenges that neurodivergent people experience obtaining and maintaining employment, and how maybe an inability to do that, not through their own fault or all sorts of different complex reasons, how that's affected their lives. But I'm also interested in people that consider themselves neurodivergent and how who have kind of thrived in their career, and understanding what was it that you had that enabled you to kind of realize your potential, and for your differences to be recognized as kind of valuable and kind of virtuous. Because some of the traits assigned to neurodivergent people, like kind of an honesty and a kind of candidness and directness, in society we value honesty, but the kind of directness that a lot of autistic people communicate with often is received quite poorly. And it's like, well, do we value honesty and direct communication, or do we not? And I think especially in a country like the UK, where kind of there's a lot of hidden meaning sometimes to the things we say, it's not as kind of clear. It's even more challenging potentially than, say, for instance, I don't know, somewhere like the United States, where it's a bit more direct.
It's going to be a fascinating conversation, one way or another, and we can learn quite a lot from the conversation tonight. Let's go back to the podcast for a moment. It's Working to Work is the podcast. What's your aim with it? What's the purpose of it, if you like?
I think for me, I want to understand what the challenges are for other people. So I came to it through kind of my own challenges in work. I've had some successes, but I feel like I've had to go a kind of roundabout way sometimes to achieve some of the things I have. And it's been more difficult to find sustained work in where I think my strengths are best placed. And I don't necessarily perceive that. I mean, it's hard, it's difficult comparing yourself to others. But I think some of the challenges that I've had obtaining that have been through kind of my differing ways of communicating and behaving and thinking sometimes. And what I realized coming out of a job last year was that I felt I had to leave was that it wasn't about ability. It was really kind of about a kind of friction in terms of needs, about what I was communicating I needed, without the kind of context of neurodiversity or any kind of specific condition. Like, from my perspective, that shouldn't be necessary, because that doesn't necessarily mean anything to anyone. If you say I'm autistic, people have all sorts of different conceptions of what that is, and also the spectrum is wide, and one autistic person can be different from another, and often you don't know. The challenge I had was that I couldn't communicate. My way of communicating was seen as invalid, and I think that is because there was a lack of a kind of willingness to understand different ways.
So we've got Ben in Clacton first, and then Philip in Quayside. Ben, good morning.
Good morning, Dotun. It's great that you've got an expert on there tonight, and it's fantastic, and you should do more of it. All the programmes should do more of this, because it's a major problem in this country. My grandchild is autistic, and he's got ADHD as well, which is the opposite. It must be difficult for him, for a start. He's on the higher range of spectrum, so he's to a certain extent lucky, because he was 3 years ahead of his peers in school, and still is, of course. But the hostility started against him in nursery, because that's where it starts. And it continues right through to secondary school. And they don't have the facilities or the expertise to deal with it. So you're getting, I mean, the government were banging on about non-attendance. Well, a lot of the non-attendance is caused by the government itself, because they've destroyed the services available. CAMS, for instance, has had their funding cut, and you ended up with a situation where a child has to wait 3 years minimum in order to get a proper diagnosis and get additional help in school. The money doesn't come to the school until it's been gone through several years of misery to a certain extent. And your expert probably knows that already. And that's what's happening. My grandchild now is part of a group of autistic children who are being taught outside of school, because it just wasn't. He was well ahead, but physically in the playground, he was given no protection whatsoever, and he was assaulted on several occasions, and he also assaulted several people to defend himself, and that's what happens, and it's quite common within schools, and that's a very early stage. He's only 13, and he's had it for many years. I had to pay privately to a Harley Street psychiatrist to diagnose him, because they kept saying, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with him." And of course, my daughter, who's worked with autistic children for 30 years, knew when he was a baby that he was autistic. And finally, we got the diagnosis because we had to pay for it. And he's now getting support. But he's getting support outside of the normal school, because that's what he needs. And he's thriving at the moment. And I want to know what your expert would actually think about that.
Well,
and I'm sure he will agree with me.
I don't doubt it. But let me say the first thing. When I described Sam earlier on, before we came on air, as an expert, he said, no, I'm not an expert. The beauty of Sam Robinson here in this conversation, he's one of our own. He's one of our own. He's a listener, and he's a nightclubber. He's got a Brazilian shirt. No, he's one of our own. And if we can't get a sense of this from one of our own, which I suspect we can, we don't need an expert. We don't need. We've got one of our own here. Sam, Sam, meet Ben in Clacton. Ben in Clacton. Here's Sam Robinson. How much of what Ben?
Sam.
Hello, Ben.
How much of what Ben, Ben has described about his grandson resonates for you?
Well, I think being a target of bullying resonates. I didn't have the faculties or the instilled thing to fight back in a way that I kind of wish I had. I think I was raised by pacifists, but sometimes it's necessary to defend oneself. And I think what's really positive to hear is that Ben's grandson has found a route of some success in terms of like education that does feel gratifying. I think a lot of the struggles potentially in terms of work like come from schooling and kind of the experience there as well, not just in terms of the social aspects, but in terms of is the schooling like meeting, like addressing the strengths and the challenges of that particular student. And I know that's a complex thing to try and resolve and try and find a progressive way to manage. But I wonder like how schools, because my experience of school wasn't particularly good. I got really poor A-levels, but then I went to university and got a very good degree. So it's not, from my perspective, it's not the ability or the will to do it. It's a lot of the time it's the environment and whether that suits you.
Why the bullying? Where does the bullying come from?
I was thinking about this the other day and thinking about what precipitated some of those interactions. I think sometimes maybe it's saying something that people wouldn't expect you to say, and you don't mean it in a way, but it's interpreted a certain way, and then someone wants to attack you. I think sometimes you're just a target when you're not feeling confident enough, or it's not in you to like fight back, or you think that's wrong, or you've kind of and. That's a perfectly fine thought to have, that you don't want to use violence to respond to violence, but it also in certain environments can make you.
I'm just going to ask you one more question on this. We've got to go to the news in a minute, and I know, Ben, you probably want to ask a question as well, but just one more question. Okay, I'm particularly concerned about the bullying. As you can imagine, many of us have been bullied. We know what it's like. It's not nice, whoever you are, whether you're neurodiverse or otherwise. And is there, what would have made a difference there? For example, Ben has talked about the funding that has been taken away to a certain extent from schools to be able to not just protect and support the person who might have a slightly different way of thinking than all their fellow pupils. I wonder whether when you were at school, if the teacher had sort of helped you explain the difference and how important or insignificant this difference was, if that would have helped.
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Well, when I was younger, I didn't have these diagnoses. I didn't have this kind of awareness. And I think that's what fascinates me about hearing from people is, like, I reckon there's tons of people that have similar experience where these kind of neurodivergent challenges will resonate, but they don't necessarily align it with this kind of term, which is absolutely fine because we're all humans, and in a progressive future really would be kind of accepting that we have these differences. But I think once you have that paradigm in your mind, it can help to reduce some of the shame that tells you it was my fault, I was the easy target, I said this thing wrong, and you can think, well, no, I've got a different way of thinking about and doing things that other people do, and there's a lot you can take from that.
Beverly in Liverpool, thank you for calling. How are you? You all right?
Fine. How are you, Dotun?
Very well, thanks very much.
I've got 2 points. One's about myself and one's about my 2 grandsons. Myself, I feel as though I am dyslexic. And can I say that neuro, is that to do with the brain? And
yes.
Diversity, is that to do with thinking differently, people thinking differently?
I think the diversity, but is basically that the way that we think, the way our brains work, which obviously impacts our communication, our behaviour, and our thinking, is diverse. So this idea of neurodiversity is there isn't just one way to do those different things. There's a broad human experience. Anyway,
on my report, I used to have could do better. Now, they were allowed to write that then, but I used to stick my hand up thinking I got the right answer. And they didn't say that was the wrong answer, but they said, well, can you think of it a different way? So they put it in words so that, you think, well, I must have answered that wrong. Anyway, when I was younger, I used to say to my mum and dad, can I go out and play in the dengar, please? They looked at me and said, you mean garden? I said, yeah. So that's only now recently have I thought, well, I wonder if I am dyslexic. I haven't had it diagnosed, but when I read books, I sometimes read the sentences back to front, and then I have to read that line again to make sure I've understood the line and, the sentence in the book. And like I say, it's on my mind now, even at my age. Could have done better. Well, at the time, they obviously didn't look into it like they do now. And I'm glad that they're looking into it. I mean, I go on to my grandsons now. My younger one of the grandsons, he can do 11-year-old's homework, maths homework. He's very good. He's only 7, and he can do an 11-year-old's maths. And he and his brother are autistic. That's where we're up to anyway.
Okay, that seems to be one of those recurring themes as well, though. And just stay with us a moment, Beverly, that people who are neurodivergent, whether autistic or otherwise, are clever or brilliant at something or other. And maths is, one of those things that's come up over and over again, that, okay, this person thinks very differently and they're a genius.
I have a coach at the moment that's been incredibly useful for me, and they're a neurodivergent, and actually working with someone that understands you has been incredibly helpful. But the way they describe kind of neurodivergent strengths, like there's neurotypical, and it's a tighter kind of between challenges and strengths, and there's a bit less space. And then kind of with neurodivergent people, there's some things we're very, very good at, and others a bit lower down. It's a shame you can't see, but I'm using my hands a lot.
He's using his hands.
There's a bigger disparity, was what I'm saying, often in terms of like where the strengths and challenges are, I think, with neurodivergent people, but they exist in.
But Sam, it knocks my confidence though, to answer any questions, and then I think to myself, I got the answer right, I should have put my hand up. But that's where the confidence, gets knocked then. It's one of those things that I would like to sort of look up and look into, you know what I mean? I mean, luckily, my grandson, 7-year-old, he is under special needs in the school. So they get help then, the government help the school to give that extra help to these children who they think need it. And I'm glad it's come up now. I really am. And it's a good topic. Thanks to Dotun and whoever. It's really a good topic. And thank you for your advice as well, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Beverly, one quick question for you. What difference would it make to you now, at the age you are now, if you are diagnosed now, if you go and get the diagnosis, you say you don't know for certain whether you're dyslexic, but if you went and got that diagnosis now, what difference would it make to you? Do you mind me asking that?
It probably would help my confidence, because I do lack. I mean, I can talk to people, Dotun, but then I sometimes shut up if we're in a group and that. I sometimes be quiet, and I think I'm sort of scared to say the next sentence or something because of my confidence. So I think it may help with my confidence.
Wow, that is as good a reason as any to have this phone in. Thank you for taking part, Beverly. Really appreciate it. Beverly in Liverpool there. Sophie in Reading is waiting to come on as well. Hello, Sophie. You all right?
Well, I've got pleurisy, but apart from that, I'm all right.
Well, that's not too good. Hopefully it doesn't affect your breathing too much.
No, not too bad.
Yeah, if you feel like, you can't carry on with the conversation, then feel free to duck out. But neurodiversity, how does that relate to you, if you don't mind me asking that way?
Yeah, I've got bipolar condition, so it's taken 20 years for them to diagnose it and get the right medication. I've got a friend who's ADHD, and she's just been diagnosed in her 50s. And she can't get the medication that she needs. Even the consultant knew that. He prescribed her medication that she can't get hold of. So that seems to me very stupid. But my experience today was quite interesting. I was going with Vitality private insurance, medical insurance, because I have chiropractics and stuff. And they said they couldn't insure me because I have regular mental health checkups.
So that's one disadvantage, or perhaps that's one aspect, one discriminatory aspect. I'm not talking about this particular insurer, but insurers in general towards that then.
Well, I
imagine...
got insurance with another insurer. I was just comparing like for like, and I liked what Vitality offered.
Sure.
They said if I had a checkup every year, they'd be okay, but because I was having more regular checkups, then they couldn't do it. And I kind of put the phone down thinking that's a bit weird and I don't really want to go with you anymore. And now I'm thinking perhaps I should get some advice about that because I think that is discrimination.
Well, they've got their side of the argument. No doubt they've got a reason for having these things. Yeah, and often enough, it's not even the direct insurer that you talk to, but at the end of the day, the sort of bigger insurer backing them sometimes. And then arguably the laws of the land, Sam, arguably there are many laws of the land that either are discriminatory towards neurodivergent people, and I'm thinking about ordinary things like, driving licenses, speed limits, or whatever it might be, and don't take into consideration people who might think differently in the way that these rules are. So there might be general discrimination in society, but also, quite apart from a general discrimination, just a general ignorance about what is needed from insurance companies or otherwise.
Yeah, and I've had the same experience with insurance where they ask you, are you taking any medication or do you have this? And if you're honest, which I think a lot of us are, we want to be as truthful as possible, and you put that and it somehow like bars you or your premium goes up. And it's like, well, this is like just medication for me that helps me live. So it seems strange to me, like what sometimes the insurers see as like risks as it pertains to kind of like medication that is prescribed to you. And I know, for example, the driving one, I know someone that was worried about that with their diagnosis and declined to maybe like offer that information so that they didn't affect driving, which it seems strange. Why would that kind of be a factor in it, that you're autistic or whichever kind of neurodivergent trait?
I've had my driving license taken away from me because of the medication I was on.
And you're probably not the only one as well, and not just for being taking medication for bipolar, but all sorts of conditions. But is bipolar, or do you see it as part of the neurodiversity spectrum, Sophie?
Well, I have been told that I'm probably autistic by somebody who said that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, and lots of high-achieving people are autistic. And my mum, I think, has got Asperger's, although she's never been diagnosed.
Did you get a sense when you were younger of, I think differently, or I look at things differently, or whatever it might be? Oh,
yeah, I asked my friends. They said I always look at everything like laterally.
Yeah.
And I used to do crosswords and stuff, and I could laterally think, and I always seem to come at things from a different angle from other people.
My mum told me the same thing when I was a child. We were playing some game and she told me, like, you're a very good lateral thinker. So this is pre-neurodiversity. And it also makes me think what the previous caller mentioned about being asked a question, answering it, and kind of being guided towards the other kind of answer. Like sometimes neurodivergent people are asked to put their mind in the box as opposed to, often we're told think outside the box. Our thinking is always outside the box. And what we seemingly have to do a lot of the time in society and life is get our thinking, how would the majority think, and what would they want me to say? And
so you've got to be like the majority.
It seems so. That's what's asked of you.
I'm in trouble, Sophie. You know what I'm like. I'm in big trouble. Think like the majority. It's not always possible.
You'll be all right. You're one of the chosen few.
Well, I'm not sure about that. Thank you. Really appreciate the call as well, Sophie in Reading. There, I asked earlier on. I'm sure everybody will be fascinated to hear this as well. And I've kept them waiting on the cliff edge for long enough. Sam, tell me about. You said you didn't know when you were younger that you were neurodiverse or autistic. What about when you had that diagnosis? What difference did it make? Was it a relief or was it a burden? How did you absorb that news?
They came gradually. So when I was living in the States, I was diagnosed with ADHD, but I didn't really think that much about it. I wasn't kind of in the mindset of exploring neurodiversity then. So I kind of forgot about that, and actually coming back, stopped being medicated for it. Subsequently, I got a dyslexia diagnosis 4 years ago, which is, like your previous caller mentioned, it was something that I always felt like think I might be dyslexic, but I didn't know enough about it, and got that. But then again, still didn't really do that much. Then the challenges at work happened, and a couple of years ago, a colleague mentioned that the way I was asking questions and needing a certain clarity made them think seemed like an autistic way of communicating. And 4 years prior, it had been I'd been told, they saw traces, I think they call it, or of autism. So coming out of that, as well as like wanting to understand what's not working at work, and then kind of recognizing some of my challenges are very much aligned with other people with similar kind of communication modes, I started to look more into neurodiversity and joined this coaching group for neurodivergent individuals, as thinking of myself as dyslexic and with ADHD, and kind of recognized actually through being with those people and the commonalities we had, that how many of kind of my traits and behaviors and ways of thinking and challenges and also strengths aligned with autism. And so eventually I got the diagnosis from the NHS relatively recently last year. But what I'm saying is there wasn't a kind of light bulb moment. It was actually like a bit more gradual, I think.
Yeah, I've still got questions. You've posed some more questions in that answer. Well done, you. We've got Sarah in Lichfield with us. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Dotun. Nice to speak to you.
Absolute pleasure. But you're a teacher, Sarah.
I am. I'm lucky enough to teach children with SEMH needs. So I work in what's called a special school. So I work with children with social, emotional and mental health needs. So children who come to our school will have had a diagnosis, hopefully, or do have an education and healthcare plan. So I work with neurodivergent children every day, and I feel really lucky to do that.
What is it about working with those children that you find particularly gratifying? I'm curious, Sarah.
Hello, Sam. Nice to speak to you.
Yeah, same.
They're what is known as neurodivergent. I'm neurotypical, and their aspect and outlook on things challenges a neurotypical view on the world, and it makes everything it challenges your kind of neurotypical behaviours, and also I feel sometimes when you work with neurodivergent people that your work or teaching as such is slightly more valuable, because neurodivergent people are so special and so important to society that if you have a chance to nurture that and help them, it's a really worthwhile feeling. So yeah, I feel very lucky to work with children with different needs to myself.
Yeah, that's really beautiful to hear. I'm curious, because I don't necessarily think the rest of society perceives neurodivergent people and the kind of opportunity to support them in the same way. What would you think would be a way that society could better embrace the being willing to be challenged, for one, which I think a lot of people struggle with neurodivergent people, and then also kind of recognizing the value and uniqueness?
Well, definitely. One of the things I had to learn when I started working with neurodivergent people is you have to have a bit of a thick skin, because they tell it to you straight. Like, it's quite brutal. Like, my self-esteem I thought was quite low, but it's actually quite high. So Monday, came back after Christmas, and I was in like a wooded area with one of the children, and I said, "Oh, be careful. My shoes are covered in mud. You're going to get really muddy." And he just went, "It's because you're really heavy. My shoes are fine." And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely, yeah." And today we were doing some work on statements, commands and questions. and they had to finish the statement. And so I said, the beginning of the sentence is, sit still. Can you finish this? And they're going, sit still. You're boring me. Sit still. I don't want to listen to you. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, if I was federal watching this lesson, they'd absolutely punish me. So in some respects, neurodiverse people can be incredibly brutal, but there's a genuine beauty in their honesty. And in some ways, I think most people would benefit in society if we were as honest and as genuine as some people. So
then how do you help them then?
Well, I had an educational psychologist who came in once. So a lot of my children thrive on routines, regularity, and that's completely understandable. I, as a human, struggle with change. They like to have visual timetables and things like that. But actually, as a person, I'm quite chaotic. So the kids will be saying, what's next? What's next? And I'm like, I don't actually know. Let's just give me a sec. Let me look at the clock. And one educational psychologist said I was desensitizing the children because they were like, what's going on? And I was just like, I don't know. And they were like, okay. So I genuinely don't know how I help the children. I just know that I feel a genuine compassion and empathy, and sometimes I think where they I feel rejected sometimes because of the way they talk or look or think about life, I might be a person that's like, I would never reject them. I think it's the best thing about them. So I don't know. I'm waffling a bit, but
no, it's
yeah,
so
I can't
lovely
really
to hear.
say how I help them, but yeah.
Yeah, you're not waffling. You're not waffling. This is one of those nights where we're all learning, actually, apart from maybe you and Sam, but the rest of us are learning, and there's so much to learn. I can't wait to hear from more callers. And thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate your contribution to the programme tonight. Well, on the one thing that Sarah was saying there about the brutality sometimes of the honesty, I was in a situation once where there was a very well-known artist, musician from Jamaica, so you'll hear the accent in a moment, as I say, and I knew somebody who just looked forward to meeting him. And this woman, for years and years that I'd known her, she'd always cover up her neck with a scarf, always covered up her neck with a scarf. But for whatever reason, on this occasion, she didn't have the scarf. And I saw for the first time that she had all sorts of scars across her neck. And I won't go into the story that she told me about that, but she had, like very, very, very quite brutal scars across her neck. And this reggae artist from Jamaica, he met her, and the first thing he says, "What happened to your neck? What happened to your neck?" Which I never thought, well, he's neurodiverse or anything. I just thought that was a very impolite way. We would have avoided that because we knew, obviously, there's some kind of tragic story behind this. That's a very British thing to do, isn't it? We'll pretend that it doesn't exist. We'll pretend that we're not seeing that. Whereas somebody, maybe from a different culture, and maybe somebody who's neurodivergent, and you will know, for example, and I'm bringing this in as a very, very delicate subject, you will know, I'm sure, that there is a challenge with not least black men who are sectioned for whatever reasons, and there's a mental health, if you like, pay a cost for them. And when I've spoken to many of them, and one in particular, I'm thinking of a musician, by the way, as well, they can't understand why they've been sectioned. Their family can't understand. And I wonder sometimes whether neurodivergency gets kind of mixed up with cultural differences that we may not understand, or social differences that we may not understand, political differences we may not understand as well. Look at Greta Thunberg, for example, climate change activist, and she looks at neurodiversity as her superpower, and arguably she knows more about about climate change than one president of the United States, certainly, I think it's fair to say. But then that's mixed up in the media as a kind of a political diversity, amongst other things, you know?
Sorry, I mean, what, the political diversity?
Well, that she is on the edge of the kind of political framework of liberal democracy or something, because she advocates, you know, drastic action to stop climate change, and then she'll be seen as something of an extreme activist then, if not political diversity.
Yeah, but I mean, there's lots of extreme kind of like radical activists, especially at the moment, in terms of the climate. I think what makes Greta Thunberg like special, from the little I know, is kind of the kind of real intensity and knowledge that she has, and the ability to kind of actually the instigator of a lot of the protests that we have now, and the kind of radical action, and that kind of dedication, I think, to a cause is really special. But I wouldn't necessarily want to attribute that to being autistic. I don't know that person.
Sure.
Each person is different. I think
I was thinking more about how sometimes it's difficult to diagnose neurodivergency or autism or ADHD. It's difficult to diagnose in any case. And I imagine that sometimes the misdiagnosis or there are misdiagnoses within that.
I'm with you. I think maybe it isn't important to kind of give someone a pass because they're neurodivergent. Maybe if I'm misunderstanding, neurodivergent, or this is just a cultural thing, or this is who they are. In the case of the example you gave, it sounds relatively insensitive, but also there wasn't an intention to harm that person in terms of what they said, right? They were just making an observation there. So you know, it could be for cultural reasons. They just were more direct because they have some kind of cognitive difference. So for whatever reason, it's important how that other person responds to that. If they take it as I'm offended, or if they take it as that person maybe not communicating exactly how they would like, but not meaning harm. And that we always think thinking about the intention of the way things are said is helpful, I think, in terms of deciding how you want to respond and how you feel about that.
We've got the privilege of having Sam Robinson with us, the host of the Working to Work podcast, and it features authentic stories and insights to cultivate awareness, inspire positive change, and be accessible to those who find value in relatable experiences, ultimately celebrating everyone's unique strengths, which I think is a laudable, ambition. Just remind me of the explanation of neurodiversity you gave earlier on, Sam, which was an excellent, I think, definition of neurodiversity. Do you remember what you said?
Yeah, so neurodiversity I think of as being the spectrum of different ways that humans think and behave and communicate. And then a neurodivergent person would be someone, I guess, who maybe thinks and communicates and behaves maybe in a way different from how the majority kind of are more aligned, maybe.
Yeah, somebody like me, somebody like you, somebody like us, maybe. I haven't been diagnosed, but you've been diagnosed, and you've told us what difference that made. We'll come back to that shortly. So we've got Sam with us until 3 o'clock. If you want to talk to him directly, then do give us a call. I'm happy to carry on talking about this after 3 o'clock as well, but he leaves in the next 25 minutes, so hurry, hurry, hurry. Lynn is in Ayrshire, then we'll speak to Martin in Ashford in Kent. Lynn, first of all, yeah, go ahead. What's your experience of this?
Hi, Dotun. Hi, Sam. I used to be an employment support worker for people with disabilities. So I would meet with my clients and take them through the whole process of what it is to get a job, going through the actual interview, getting together a CV, that kind of thing. And then helping them to actually find a job that was suitable. And then once they were in the workplace, we would take it a step forward and actually go in and work with the employer to actually try and carve out the job to make it not suitable, but to help. We'll carve it into something that's going to be beneficial to both the employer and the employee. So you're getting to know your client that you're working with and the employer as well. So that could include going to things like actual job interview with the person, and then afterwards going in and maybe doing a week in the position yourself and trying to learn as much of it as you can, attending staff meetings, education about neurodiverse people within the workplace for the company, and that kind of thing. And I really do think that that's the way forward with it, because I think it's a lack of understanding on employers' parts that causes the problem the majority of the time.
It's interesting. I spoke with the CEO of Autistica, which is a research organisation, one of the biggest that's working with the government at the moment on the government's review into autistic employment. And they're looking to set up what's called the Neurodiversity Employers Index, which is kind of be different metrics to judge how well companies are doing in a quite substantive way as opposed to kind of a performative way, but not just to kind of grade them, but also to, if something isn't working, to provide support for those companies so that they can do better. But so it's companies that have a real genuine desire to accommodate and employ and recognise the value of autistic employees and other neurodivergent employees. I
think it's also worth mentioning the value of having different people within the workplace as well, and how it becomes quite cohesive between the actual people within a team, and pointing out the actual advantages bringing someone like that into your actual team, and the team building it causes there. We used to do a lot of work around that as well. Somebody might have better skills than another person, and you can maybe move the roles that way, if you see what I mean, to kind of let that person blend into that part of the team more than they would normally. And really working to people's strengths and getting to know that person, which, to be honest with you, is what a good employer should do for any member of staff.
100%. I'd love to see employment more strengths focused and be thinking about diversity. Here's someone I've employed because I recognise the value that they're going to offer the organisation, the team, and then recognising also where they might need support. And as you say, doing this for all sorts of all different people, but maybe it's a particular use at the moment for neurodivergent individuals.
You know, and Lynn, thank you very much. You've actually brought the conversation to where I wanted to take it before Sam's got to go. With neurodiversity, isn't there a further complexity, which you noted earlier on in the conversation, that it's a range of requirements, a wide range of... it's not disabilities, is it? How would you describe the wide range of different conditions, maybe, that neurodiversity embraces?
Well, I think you can be disabled by some societal aspects. That it's not necessarily something about you, but something about the environment not working for you is disabling you.
It's disabling you. But it's a wide range of disabling possibilities. For example, the lighting condition of a workplace might affect somebody, but then does the company then say, okay, let me change the lighting in my company, even though it might adversely affect those people who aren't being disabled by it?
I think an interesting thing that came out of the discussion I had with Robert Buckland, who's the MP that's leading this review, is the approach they're taking is this universality approach. And there aren't probably that many things from what he was talking about, and probably agree to an extent, that are actually going to disadvantage the majority if you did implement them. I think in terms of light, like I do prefer dimmer lit places, but I still need it to be lit. I can't see it being so dim that most other people couldn't do their work. So these are some of the things, I think, where people think they're losing something, or it's going to be at disadvantage to them if others are getting these accommodations. But there is very little. If say, in an interview, you're able to get the questions ahead of time, there isn't really a disadvantage to that, unless the particular job is being able to answer without ever having any context of what you're going to be asked.
Fair point. And we'll come back to this in just a moment. I think there are some other interesting issues. Let me welcome Martin in Ashford in Kent, who's a first-time caller, and I do appreciate it. Martin, good morning. How are you?
Hiya. Good to meet you.
Good to speak to you. Now, you tell me what your story is. Do you mind?
Okay, I'm 52 years old. I'm autistic, dyslexic, dyspraxic. When I was in primary school, I was dumbed as stupid, and I've been in the remedial class occasionally. Really good in science. Subsequently, I've got chartered engineer, chartered geologist status, so that's given my identity away to loads of people who know who I am. I'm working in the workplace full-time as an engineer geologist. I'm the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Champion, raising awareness for neurodiversity in the workplace and in society.
Well done. Well done. In all respects, well done. Should we go back for a moment? And because remedial classes is something that I remember, and I'm sure many listeners of a certain age remember. And that... Well, what effect did that have on you? Because essentially, for those who don't know, remedial classes, at least the way it was perceived when I was at school, and particularly secondary school, was, and I hope you don't mind me using the terms that they would have used in those days, it was the class for dummies. That's how we saw it, wasn't it? And I imagine that's how you felt, or it came across to you.
Yeah, precisely. I still have that picture of the famous, the dunce hat.
Yeah.
And you're almost stigmatised by your friends because you're different, and then you're stigmatised by the teachers because they want to treat you differently. So then you're automatically seen as different in a stigma, and they're isolated from the rest of that community, that group of pupils.
Yeah, this is a shocking thing. They actually had classes further away from the rest of us. Do you know what I mean? You couldn't have made it much more discriminatingly for people. How did that affect you during that time? How imagine you had a miserable time at school.
Yeah, I was bullied and what else? Lots of things. Misunderstood. Not using my strengths because obviously good at science, solving problems. I wasn't using that as much as I could be. And I think that suffered me, failed exams and eventually got to university by the back door. But I think it makes you work harder for what you've got.
I'm just curious how you were able to identify those strengths that you had and to kind of channel them into work that was gratifying. Again,
by hard work, I think, and just having I had an official diagnosis, and I'm fortunate to have one, but I think it's also being self-aware and learning about myself and what I can do and my strengths, and then getting to an age that now just being able to communicate, I think, about my strengths and my weaknesses to my employer.
Yeah.
But if you're coming out as someone who's quite young, I think that's very hard, so it needs people like myself to keep on raising awareness and try leading to acceptance.
Sam was talking a moment or two ago about just the job application. Sam was talking a moment ago about the job application process.
Yep.
There are all sorts of challenges, aren't there, for neurodiverse people? I'm reading one article now, and a woman's talking, for example, and I'm just wondering how much of this resonates with you. She went for a job interview, and she was expecting to be interviewed by 1, 2 or 3 people, and instead they were like a 10-person panel, for example, all spaced around the room, so not necessarily even sitting in front of her. And she recalls that as soon as she saw that, she knew that she wasn't going to get the job. Do you have memories of how challenging it was, maybe, or what needed to be put in place for you to, as Sam was saying a moment ago, to show your excellence, that you're worthy of the job, for example?
Yeah, it's very, very challenging, and I've had a lot of challenges, and my challenges are unique to me, but I think they are similar. There's obstacles with the interview process, even writing a CV, even getting to talk to someone in the human resource management or the personnel team to say that you need adjustments. And if you if you get into the job, then you need to then fight for your adjustments that you need, and people need to know that you need them to strive and survive in the workplace.
Yeah, Martin, you are inspirational. Nevertheless, I can't argue with that. Given what you've been through, to come out the other end with, the excellence that you're showing. Well done, you. Good morning. In 1982 to 83, my 11-year-old brought her dictation home. My husband said it was unreadable. I took her into another room and managed to write it down so that it could be read. He asked how I did that. I didn't know. A day or so later, Frank Boff and Susan Hampshire were talking about dyslexia, and I wondered if she could be. So I took her to the Institute and found out that she and my son were. And at 40 years, I too was dyslexic. And a few years later, my younger daughter was diagnosed as well. I now have 3 dyslexic grandchildren and 1 with autism. Not bad for one family. Only my son got help, but he had an IQ of 126 plus. I'm 83 years old, Monica in North Yorkshire. Typical, would you say? Not undiagnosed, and then through the parents' own insistence, they came to a conclusion that this is what's going on, and then you can live as happily ever after, can you?
I mean, not my experience. My parents didn't have that kind of pathologizing sense, or a sense of like, I want to take you because there's something wrong here. I think they took a different approach, but it's definitely kind of a genetic. I think there's a lot of family ties, I think, to neurodivergent ways.
Paul in York says, I've always wondered about myself since I was about 5 years old and why I was different to other kids my age at that time. From the age of 4, I could play the drums, and I had my own full drum kit by the age of 5. I also played guitar and had a guitar by the age of 8. Do you think that this could be part of the neurodiversity you're talking about on the show tonight? It'd be difficult to analyse that, and we're not experts in this respect. Just because you're gifted in artistically, for example, doesn't mean you're neurodiverse, does it?
No, and I think that kind of Rain Man idea of like the savant has been like probably detrimental to a lot of autistic people over the years, because I don't think not every autistic person is a master and specialist or prodigy in like one field.
Yeah, I did forget about
props to be able to drum that.
Of course. I wish I could do it.
Still super cool.
I wish I could do it. Yeah,
I've got no rhythm.
Me neither.
So I use a drum machine.
But that Rain Man, the movie with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise is in that as well, isn't it? Helpful or unhelpful?
Oh, probably unhelpful, I reckon.
Even though it.
I don't know, maybe at the time it's a different time, I wasn't conscious enough, but I think probably now it's seen as more unhelpful. Anything
else unhelpful that you'd like to say in the last few 30 seconds with you?
No, I want to say thank you, and thanks to all the people that called in. It was a pleasure to listen. All right, we're back. I hope you enjoyed this episode and took something from it. If you did, please let me know in the comments, or if you're listening in on the podcast or on Resonance, you can email me w2w working to work, and it's a 2 like the number at kalou.co.uk, KALOU. As always, the YouTube channel is a good way to start a conversation, I think, because we've got the comments, and it would be great to have a bit of discourse around topics raised in these episodes. I'd love to hear what you thought, and what kind of topics and areas of employment as it relates to neurodivergent type differences. So thank you again, and I'll see you next time.